And we are back for episode 6.3. Our episode begins with Jon waking up from being dead. Davos is amazed despite having requested the resurrection, and Melisandre is beside herself as well. Jon is upset that the others betrayed him and reports that he saw nothing in death. So we are past the book story here, but as I've said previously, it may be that Jon's spirit will return to his body after being a ghost in the books, as Melisandre saw in her flames, Jon becoming a wolf and then becoming a man again. Now, Jon seeing nothing in death is fairly consistent with the book and George R.R. Martin's other writings. Our author is an atheist who's written many times about his fear of the great nothingness of death. And in the book, Beric Dondarrion does make some similar comments after returning from the dead. He says fire consumes, it consumes, and when it's done, there is nothing left. Nothing. Thoros then asks Beric if death is sweet, and Beric replies, sweet, no my friend, not sweet. We then get a scene with Jon as he heads outside to hug it out with Tormund and then Dolorous Edd. Now in the book, Jon doesn't really have a strong emotional relationship with Dolorous Edd like he does here. Edd doesn't even appear as a character until the second book, where he cracks a few jokes, and then Jon is off with Qhorin Halfhand and then the Wildlings and then the battle at Castle Black. Edd returns to Jon's company before Jon's election as Lord Commander and then briefly becomes Jon's steward, again mostly as a joke teller. He's then sent off to manage one of the forts along the wall. Jon's friends who he was close to were namely Sam, Pip, and Grenn, the latter two who are still alive in the books, though off at other forts. Of course, Jon not having any friends or confidants around him is a primary reason why he was assassinated. Next we get a scene with Sam and Gilly on a ship to Oldtown, where Sam is ill and Gilly is eager to see the beauty of the South. We learn that Sam plans on having Gilly and the babe stay at Horn Hill, which upsets Gilly as they will be apart. Now in the book, Sam's journey to Oldtown is actually filled with quite a few adventures and spans an entire book. His crew of companions is also a bit different. Here it's just Gilly and Gilly's son, but in the book a singer named Darien comes along, as well as Maester Aemon. Also in the book, the baby is not Gilly's son, but Mance Rayder's son, as Jon did a baby swap. Jon was concerned that people with King's blood, Aemon and Mance's son, could be burned by Melisandre, and so he sent them off. Though there is some question whether the baby swap actually happened, but this debate is mainly due to the fact that Gilly's baby is smaller and less healthy, but begins to thrive after the swap while Mance's son begins to struggle some. So as in the show, Book Sam does get seasick, but he isn't the only one who has trouble on this trip. It's really hell for everyone. Gilly is distraught from the baby swap, the baby cries all of the time and throws up, and Aemon begins to die. This creates a rather intolerable environment for Darien the singer, and when they reach Braavos, Darien finds the city is in great demand for his singing abilities. Darien decides to quit the watch, which leads to him getting into a physical fight with Sam, and later Darien is murdered by Arya for breaking his vows. The situation is made even more morally complicated by the fact that Darien always maintained his innocence of the rape that put him on the wall, and of course Jon, who Arya loves, broke his vows over and over. In the wake of Sam's fight with Darien, Sam ends up meeting the crew of a ship called the Cinnamon Wind. This is a crew that Book Dany actually had a conversation with back in Qarth. Aemon is absolutely gleeful about the news of Daenerys, and the Cinnamon Wind agrees to take Sam, Aemon, Gilly, and the babe to Oldtown. Aemon even wants to go straight to Dany in Slaver's Bay to be her advisor, but ends up dying instead. Next we get a scene of Bran watching the showdown at the Tower of Joy, a face-off between Ned and his companions, and the Kingsguard. Here in the show, it's a 7-on-2 fight with Sir Arthur Dayne taking down nearly everyone. Ned is about to be killed when Howland Reed stabs Dayne in the back. Bran reveals that his father lied and said that he killed Dayne. Ned is about to head into the tower to search for his sister when Bran yells his name, and it seems his father can hear Bran. The Three-Eyed Raven pulls Bran out of the situation and claims that Ned heard the wind. The two argue, and Bran declares that he doesn't want to be a man in a tree. The Three-Eyed Raven says that he won't be like him, a man living for 1,000 years, but Bran still has to learn everything. So the show has combined a couple different scenes from the book. Bran does go back in time in the weirwood to observe his father praying in front of a tree and calls out his name. Ned does seem to react, and the Three-Eyed Crow pulls Bran back and claims that Ned heard the wind. Incidentally, in the book, the Three-Eyed Crow is a 125-year-old Targaryen bastard called Bloodraven. The showdown at the Tower of Joy is a different scene and would perhaps be unobservable to Bran, as his journeys back in time seem to be limited to what the weirwood faces can see. There are no weirwoods in the Mountains of Dorne. So the showdown at the Tower of Joy is perhaps the most reread and analyzed scene in the entire book series. Unlike here in the show where it's from Bran's perspective, it is shown in the first book in a fever dream of Ned himself. Specifically, it's after his showdown with Jaime where he's stabbed. So in the book, instead of 2 Kingsguard, Ned's crew faces 3. Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, and Arthur Dayne. And actually in Season 4, Joffrey reads the White Book, the Kingsguard's history, and in it, 3 Kingsguard die at the Tower of Joy. Now much of this dialogue between Ned and the Kingsguard is lifted straight from the book. And in the book, Ned does say that Howland Reed, who's actually quite small in stature in the book, saved Ned from Arthur Dayne in some way. So a last-minute stab in the back it may be. Arthur Dayne, in both book and show, is considered the best swordsman around, though in the book he's no wielder of 2 swords. He has a single blade called Dawn that is supposedly made from meteor rock, though it is pale as milk glass, so some fans wonder if it's actually a sword of the others. Now in both book and show, Ned wonders why the Kingsguard are here at the Tower instead of at war or with the King, and in the book Ned wonders why they aren't with Viserys. And this has led to a huge fan debate on whether or not the Kingsguard are here at the Tower because they're guarding the new baby king. Here in the show, the Kingsguard simply say that they were ordered to be here by Rhaegar, which is something that Barristan mentions is completely possible in the book. Now, the whole guarding the baby king doesn't really work out in the book as a concept, as Viserys was named the heir by Aerys and should be ahead of Rhaegar's children. Then again, it may be that the Kingsguard had already chosen Rhaegar as their king in rebellion, and thus Rhaegar's children would be the heirs. Next, beyond the Narrow Sea and beyond the book plot, we have Daenerys arriving at Vaes Dothrak, where she is presented to the Khals widows, the Dosh Khaleen. Now again, in the book, Daenerys sees a vision at the House of the Undying of Vaes Dothrak with crones coming out of a lake and kneeling and shivering before her. The Dosh Khaleen are described as crones, so it does seem that the Daenerys story will be heading this way. So here in the show, the Dosh Khaleen reveal to Dany that many Khaleesi's received the same exact stallion that mounts the world prophecy, and that it's no big deal. They also reveal that they don't really have very much power, and that it's the Khals who will be returning to decide on what to do with Dany. Dany is in trouble for not returning to Vaes Dothrak immediately, as she was required to do after the death of Khal Drogo. Now in the book, Viserys does call the whole Dosh Khaleen prophecy ceremony a mummer's show prior to it taking place. So it seems that something was wrong with the ceremony. Either it contained a planted prophecy that Viserys already knew about, or like here in the show, it's a routine thing. Everyone receives the same so-called special prophecy. So here in the show, the Dosh Khaleen say that they're powerless and that it's the Khals who have the real power. This is not what we hear in the book. The Dosh Khaleen are supposedly the rulers of Vaes Dothrak, with their decrees being followed and Khals bowing to their wisdom. Supposedly. It may be that when Dany described them, she didn't really know what she was talking about and that Dosh Khaleen's power was only ceremonial. It's hard to comment on the truth of it, as we haven't gotten this far in the book. Next we get an extra scene of Varys with a captured member of the Sons of the Harpy. She believes she's going to be tortured, but Varys says that he would never do such a thing. Varys offers her a choice between execution or a new life in Volantis for her and her child. She accepts the latter. Now in the book, Daenerys and her advisor Skahaz catch plenty of suspects who may or may not have links to the Sons of the Harpy, and they are indeed tortured with her approval. The torture, though, proves to be useless as too many people are named and linked to the Sons of the Harpy. We aren't sure if this is because torture is rather ineffective at extracting reliable information, or if it's because innocent people were tortured, or if because the conspiracy is actually enormous. Again, in the book, there is a question to whether or not the Sons of the Harpy are a real organization or just some loose movement. Next, we get an extra scene of Tyrion trying to socialize with Grey Worm and Missandei and failing at it. He is rescued by Varys, who tells him that the Sons of the Harpy are funded by the upper class of Yunkai, Astapor, and Volantis. The crew now believes that the local population of Meereen is not a threat, but they do have to deal with a rich foreign threat. Now in the book, the Sons of the Harpy may or may not be real, but there certainly is angry public sentiment in the city stemming from various issues including freed slaves taking jobs of citizens and Barristan arresting Hisdar. And while other cities are certainly allied against Dany because of her anti-slavery stance, we have no evidence of them being the financial source or puppet masters of the Sons of the Harpy. Next we get an extra scene of Qyburn bribing Varys' little birds with candy and hit jobs in order to make them his. Cersei and Jaime then come downstairs and tell Qyburn that they want his spies everywhere to defeat their enemies. Now in the book, Varys' little birds are never taken from him. In fact, between Varys' disappearance after Tyrion's trial and his re-emergence after Cersei's walk of shame, it's assumed that Varys remained in the Red Keep, just hiding. And if not there, certainly abreast of all the things going on. By the way, in the book, Varys' little birds have no tongues and are specially trained for their service. They aren't just random poor children like here in the show. Now there is a line in the 4th book where Cersei notes that some of Varys' informants have come to Qyburn wanting to trade information for money. However, these are not Varys' little birds, and it's quite clear that Qyburn's network of spies is not nearly as extensive as Varys' network of spies. Qyburn is really only aware of what's going on in and around King's Landing and what's going on down in Dorne, and he often relies on going down to the docks to talk to captains about worldly events. We next get an extra scene of a gathering of Kevan Lannister's small council with Olenna Tyrell, Mace Tyrell, and Pycelle. Jaime enters with Cersei, and Jaime claims that he's on the small council being Lord Commander, and they want to coordinate their efforts to defeat the High Sparrow and the Dornish. Pycelle equivocates on whether Jaime is on the small council, and then Kevan, Olenna, Mace, and Pycelle walk out refusing to work with Jaime and Cersei. Now, on the issue of Jaime being on the small council, yes, in the book, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard is almost always there, and in the book, Barristan actually is on Robert's small council, which is something they changed in the show. Book Jaime, though, acts uninterested in politics, and thus never attends a meeting before departing. Now, in the book, after Kevan takes regency from Cersei, Mace Tyrell becomes his hand. Here in the show, he's Master of Coin. Sam's father, Randall Tarley, becomes Master of Law, and Paxter Redwine becomes Master of Ships. A loyal but slow Westerman, Harry Swift, is Master of Coin, with Pycelle being Grand Maester, Qyburn Master of Whispers, and a place reserved for Lady Nym. Quite notably, and in opposition to the show, Kevan immediately feels that he has too few allies on his small council, with Tyrell, Tarley, and Redwine all supporting the Reach. Kevan never really trusts the Tyrells and is still very much loyal to his family, even having a cordial dinner with Cersei right before his death. Additionally, Kevan never refuses to deal with the High Sparrow. The High Sparrow is definitely seen as a threat, and Kevan is trying to save Cersei, as if she's proven guilty of incest in her trial, Tommen ceases being king, and Margaery ceases being queen. All in all, Kevan being semi-competent at his job and diplomatic actually leads to his murder. Varys fears that Kevan will be successful in resolving the conflicts between the Lannisters and the Tyrells. Next we get an extra scene where Tommen confronts the High Sparrow, demanding the release of his wife and the dismissal of the charges against his mother. The High Sparrow denies Tommen and then tries to convince him that to be a good king and leader, one must be religious, and thus the manipulation of Tommen begins. Now in the book, Tommen is 9, and we have no known attempt of the High Sparrow to try to manipulate anyone other than his regular followers. That is, unless you count him tricking Cersei into rearming them. Even Lancel had already become a religious zealot prior to meeting the High Sparrow. Here in the show, the High Sparrow is a charismatic con man who's able to persuade people with his little sermons. While in the book, the High Sparrow is actually a fairly brusque and unlikable guy for being a leader. Next we get a montage of Arya training at the House of Black and White as a blind girl. She practices with the staff, learns about potions, and tells her life story to the waif, including information about her death list. At the end of the montage, Jaqen offers her her sight and she refuses, but he grants it to her anyway. So as we've seen, the show has jumbled the timeline a bit of Book Arya's adventures in Braavos. Arya is interrogated about her death list in the book, but it's done by the kindly man who overhears her reciting it, and this event happens rather early in her time at the house back when she had sight, and she doesn't give up very much information about it other than the names. So while being blind, Arya does get a bit of training, but little of it is combat related other than the kindly man's nightly beatings of her. Arya navigates the house with sounds and smells, she's told to count the steps and feel the markings on the walls, she practices the lying game with the waif, and she feels the engravings of coins. Arya does learn about potions and poisons, but again this was done prior to her losing her sight. One of the big things that's been excluded from the show is that Arya is often sent around town to spy and collect information for the house. The house does tempt Arya with offers to restore her sight as they do here in the show, but Arya refuses. Now the largest difference between book and show with the Arya story is that while blind, Arya has a telepathic awakening due to the sensory deprivation. She skin changes Nymeria off in the Riverlands and is eventually able to skin change a cat and regain her sight through the cat. When Arya brings the cat home, she's able to see the kindly man before he beats her in the evening, and she's able to hit him first. At this point, the kindly man decides to restore Arya's vision. It's uncertain why exactly he did this, though. Perhaps he feels that she's using her other senses extremely well, or perhaps he knows that she's a skin changer. It's hard to say. We next go up north for an extra scene with Ramsay greeting Small Jon Umber. Small Jon Umber wants to team up with Ramsay to kill Jon Snow, as long as it includes killing all of the wildlings, who he fears will raid his lands. He refuses all of the traditional kneeling and homage, but offers Ramsay a gift of Rickon, Stark, and Osha. Now in the book, the northern political situation is rather complicated. Small Jon Umber himself died at the Red Wedding. His father, Great Jon Umber, is a prisoner of the Freys, which is supposedly keeping the Umbers in line. However, one brother, Mors Umber, sides with Stannis, while another brother, Hothor Umber, sides with Ramsay. Though Hothor's loyalty is highly in question as he has around him greybeards who are likely willing to die. It is House Manderly who seeks Rickon Stark, who they hear is on Skagos from Theon's former squire Wex. And the Manderlys claim that they will switch from supporting Ramsay to Stannis if Davos successfully finds Rickon. So assuming Davos is successful, it's the Manderlys who would have control of Rickon in the book. Now that said, there is a connection between House Manderly and House Umber in that Robb ordered them to build ships together back in the second book, so they do seem to be highly aligned. However, we aren't sure where this Manderly-Umber alliance is going. It's difficult to imagine them turning over Rickon to Ramsay based on their actions so far, which are awfully pro-Stannis, but perhaps a new lord could betray someone, or perhaps someone could lose a battle to Ramsay and lose Rickon. And finally, we have a scene with Jon executing Athel Yarwick, Bowen Marsh, Alliser Thorne, and Olly. Alliser Thorne insists that he did the right thing, and Olly glares at Jon. And the episode ends with Jon declaring that he's no longer in the Night's Watch. So we're past the book plot, so we have no idea if there'll be executions coming up. Bowen Marsh may have a difficult time even surviving his attack on Jon to get to this point, and Alliser Thorne is still ranging north of the Wall. In the book, the conspiracy to kill Jon seems pretty widespread, so if executions happen, it seems there would be more than 4 people. Now the possibility of Jon being absolved of his Night's Watch vows based on his death has been a long fan debate. It is an odd one as Jon has already broken his vows and tried to quit the Watch twice. It doesn't seem like there needs to be a legalistic out for him, but who knows about the future of the series. And that's all for episode 6.3. See you in episode 6.4.